Chinedu, please don't go.
Amara, I can't do this anymore. This life, this struggle is not the future I want. I'm tired of pretending I'm okay.
Chinedu, so you want to leave me and your unborn baby because of her?
You and this pregnancy, you're holding me back. I need a life that makes sense for me.
Amara, I don't love this life anymore. And staying here with you feels like I'm dying slowly.
Cries bitterly.
The day Chinedu abandoned his pregnant wife, he never looked back. He left her with a broken heart, an unborn child, and a future filled with uncertainty. As he drove away toward wealth and luxury, he believed he had won. But while he was busy chasing riches, the woman he left behind was fighting battles he would never see. 5 years later, fate brought him back to her door. Broken. Alone. Full of regret. And when a little boy opened the gate, Chinedu realized that some mistakes can never truly be undone. The morning Chinedu found out his wife was pregnant, he cried. Not the quiet kind of crying that a man hides in the bathroom. He cried right there in the middle of their tiny shop, standing between shelves of canned tomatoes and sachets of seasoning cubes, tears running down his face like a river that had finally found permission to flow. He grabbed Amara and held her so tight she laughed and told him she could not breathe. And he laughed too, the kind of laugh that comes from a place so deep inside a man that it sounds almost like pain. He did not know it then. He did not know that this moment, this perfect, beautiful moment, was the happiest he would ever be. He did not know that everything was about to change, slowly, quietly, the way a fire begins not with an explosion but with a single, invisible spark. Chinedu and Amara had been married for 2 years, and in those 2 years, they had built something that most people overlooked because it was small. Their provision shop sat on the corner of a busy street in a modest part of town, sandwiched between a phone repair store and a woman who sold puff-puff every morning. The shop was not much to look at. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a running man. The floor tiles were cracked in the corner near the door. But Chinedu had painted the walls himself, a warm yellow that Amara chose because she said yellow felt like hope. Every morning, they opened the shop together. Every evening, they counted the day's earnings together, spreading the naira notes on their small kitchen table, organizing them by denomination, always calculating, always planning, always dreaming of something more. They were poor, yes. But they were together, and for a while, that was enough. What made their love different was the way they talked to each other. Not just polite conversation, not just talk about money and rent and business, they talk the way two people talk when they have decided that the other person is worth knowing completely. Amara would sit on the wooden stool behind the counter, her chin resting on her hand, and she would ask Chinedu questions like, if you could wake up anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would it be? And Chinedu would lean against the shelf and think seriously, as though it were a real question with a real answer that mattered. Somewhere cold, he always said. Somewhere where the air is clean and nobody owes anybody anything. Amara would smile at that and say, then we will get there. One provision shop at a time. And somehow, when she said it, it did not sound foolish. It sounded like prophecy. But beneath the laughter and the yellow walls and the carefully counted naira notes, there was a shadow that Chinedu carried quietly and alone. He had graduated with a first-class degree in engineering. First class. The kind of result that made a whole village gather and celebrate, that made his mother ululate in the churchyard, that made his father press money into his hands with trembling pride. He had been supposed to be great. Everyone said so. His lecturers said so. His classmates said so. Even the vice-chancellor had shaken his hand at graduation and said, young man, the world is waiting for you. But the world had not been waiting. The world had gone on without him. Application after application. Interview after interview. Rejection after rejection. Until the day came when he stopped applying and started selling. And somewhere deep inside him, in a place he never showed Amara, Chinedu was ashamed. Not of her. Never of her. But of himself. Of the distance between who he was supposed to be and who he had become. That shame would one day cost him everything. Before we begin, if you love emotional stories filled with drama, life lessons, and powerful karma, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss our next unforgettable story. Now, let's begin. The day Amara showed him the pregnancy test, she had wrapped it in a small piece of cloth like a gift and placed it in his palm without saying a word. Chinedu unwrapped it slowly, and when he saw the 2 lines, he stood absolutely still for 3 full seconds. Then something broke open inside him, something warm and enormous, and he swept Amara off her feet and spun her around the room until she screamed with laughter and begged him to put her down before he knocked something over. That night, they sat together on their small veranda under a sky heavy with stars, and Chinedu held Amara's hand and made her a promise. He looked her directly in the eyes, the way a man looks when he means every syllable of what he is about to say. Amara, he said, I swear to you, by everything I am and everything I hope to be, I will never leave you. I will never leave this child. Whatever comes, we face it together. Amara squeezed his hand. I know, she said simply. And she believed him. She believed him completely. The news of the pregnancy spread through their little world the way good news always does, fast and warm, carried on the lips of people who love them. Amara's mother came to visit and brought a pot of off onogbu that filled the whole house with its smell. Chinedu's sister called from the village and screamed so loud that Chinedu had to hold the phone away from his ear. The neighbors congratulated them. The puff-puff woman at the corner gave them free puff-puff for 3 days in a row. And Chinedu walked through all of it with his chest out and his head high, suddenly feeling more like a man than he had felt in years. Something about the knowledge that a child was coming had made the shame quieter. He worked harder at the shop. He started going to bed later, working on a small business plan in his notebook by lamplight, trying to find a way to grow what they had. He told Amara, before this baby comes, I want us to have something real. Something our child will be proud of. And he meant it. At that moment, he truly meant it. It was during those weeks of hope and planning and prayers, that the poison first entered without knocking. Chinedu had gone to the market on a Tuesday morning to restock the shop, carrying a list that Amara had written in her careful handwriting, when a car pulled up beside him. A sleek, black car with tinted windows and a small flag-shaped air freshener hanging from the mirror. The window rolled down, and a woman leaned out. She was wearing sunglasses and a cream silk blouse, her hair pressed and gleaming, her skin bright and smooth. She looked at him for a moment with her head tilted slightly, as though she were reading a book she had started long ago. Then she smiled and said, Chinedu. Chinedu Okafor. He squinted. Looked again. And then the recognition arrived slowly, the way a light comes on in a room that has been dark for a long time. Ella, he said. Ella Nwosu. She insisted on buying him a coffee. Just to catch up, she said. It was just a coffee. That is always how it begins, not with a grand decision, not with a moment of evil, but with something small and harmless sounding. Just a coffee. Just old friends. Just 10 minutes. But those 10 minutes stretched into an hour, and in that hour, Chinedu sat across from Ella in a restaurant he would never have been able to afford on his own and listened as she talked about her life. Her father's import company. Her apartments in the new estate. Her travels to Dubai and London. Her car, the black one outside, yes, it was hers. As she talked, Chinedu nodded and smiled and asked questions. But inside, something ugly was stirring. A comparison. A contrast. An old wound tearing open. Because Ella had everything he had dreamed of. And sitting there, in his market clothes with his shopping list in his pocket, Chinedu felt the shame come rushing back, louder than ever, and hungrier. He told Amara he had run into an old classmate. He did not mention that the classmate was a woman. He did not mention the restaurant, or the hour they spent talking, or the way Ella had pressed her business card into his hand and said, "Call me. I might have something for you, my father's company is looking for engineers." He told himself it was because he did not want to raise Amara's hopes unnecessarily. He told himself he would mention it when something concrete happened. But the truth, the real truth that he buried quickly under the first excuse, was that he was not ready to explain Ella to Amara. Because to explain Ella properly, he would have to explain everything he felt sitting across from her, the shame, the longing, the sudden terrible awareness of everything his life was not. And that was a conversation he was not brave enough to have. He called Ella 3 days later. She answered immediately and sounded genuinely pleased. She told him her father could use a man with his qualifications in the company's engineering department, and she would set up a meeting. Chinedu went home that evening and told Amara he had a job interview coming up. Amara clasped her hands together and said, God is faithful. She made his best shirt and pressed it with a small iron that smelled of scotched cotton when it got too hot. She polished his shoes herself, down on her knees on the kitchen floor, her belly just beginning to show beneath her wrapper. Chinedu stood in the doorway watching her, and something clenched in his chest, something he quickly looked away from. The interview happened. He got the job. And he told himself everything was going to be fine now. He told himself he could have both, the new job, the new opportunity, and his family. He told himself he was not doing anything wrong. But Ella was not content with just giving him a job. She began inviting him to lunch. Then to events, business dinners, a company party, a weekend retreat for her father's staff. Each time, Chinedu went. Each time, he came home a little later. Each time, the distance between him and Amara grew by a degree so small it was almost invisible. He stopped asking her how she was feeling. He stopped sitting with her on the veranda. He stopped reaching for her hand in the middle of the night the way he used to. Amara noticed. She did not say anything at first because she told herself it was the new job, new jobs were stressful, new jobs demanded adjustment. But one evening, when Chinedu came home past 9 smelling of a restaurant she did not know and talking about people she had never met, she sat across from him at the table and asked quietly, "Is everything okay, Chinedu? Between us?" He looked at her and said, without missing a beat, "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" And he said it in a tone that made her feel foolish for asking. At the office, Chinedu had told everyone he was single. It had started small, just not mentioning his wife in the first conversation. Then deliberately redirecting when someone asked about family. Then, when Ella asked him one day with a casual smile, "Are you seeing anyone?" He looked her in the eyes and said, "No." That was the line. That was the moment when everything stopped being an accident and became a choice. He said no. A full, clean, deliberate lie. And on the other side of town, in a shop with yellow walls and a water-stained ceiling, his pregnant wife was restocking shelves and thanking God that her husband had finally gotten a good job, not knowing that in that same moment, her husband had just erased her existence with a single word. Ella began to change toward him after that, warmer, more deliberate, more present. She began touching his arm when she laughed. She began sending him messages in the evenings. She began finding reasons for them to be alone together in ways that were hard to misread. And Chinedu, who had once loved his wife so fiercely he cried at the news of her pregnancy, found himself not pulling away. He told himself he deserved this. He had spent years grinding and suffering and being ashamed. Was he not allowed to want more? Was he not allowed to enjoy the life he had worked so hard to reach? The questions felt reasonable at the time. They always feel reasonable at the time. Amara called him one afternoon while he was in Ella's office. He looked at his phone. He saw her name, my love, saved since the first month of their marriage. And he pressed the red button. He declined the call. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to what he was doing. That evening, Amara was quiet at dinner. He did not ask why. 2 weeks later, Ella took him to see her apartment, a top-floor flat in the new estate with a view of the city below and furniture that cost more than everything Chinedu had ever owned in his entire life. She poured 2 glasses of wine and handed him one and said, "I always thought you belonged somewhere like this, Chinedu. I always thought you were meant for more." And those words, those perfectly calibrated words, landed exactly where she aimed them. Right in the middle of the shame he had carried for years. He did not go home that night. When he finally returned home the following morning, Amara was sitting in the chair by the window. She had not slept. Her eyes were swollen, and her hands were folded in her lap, and she looked at him with an expression that was not anger, it was worse than anger. It was the look of someone trying to recognize a person who has become a stranger. "Where were you?" she asked. Her voice was steady. "I had to work late," he said. "I slept at a colleague's place." Amara looked at him for a long time. Then she said, very softly, "Chinedu, who are you becoming?" He did not answer. He walked past her into the bedroom and closed the door. Later, Amara pressed her palm flat against her growing belly and whispered to the child inside her, "Do not be afraid. Whatever happens, I am here." The end came not with a dramatic fight but with a letter. The letter that Chinedu left on the kitchen table one morning while Amara was bathing. He could not face her. He told himself it was because he did not want to hurt her more with a confrontation. But the truth was simpler and uglier than that. He was a coward. The letter was short. He was sorry, he wrote. He needed to find himself. He needed to go where life could give him what he had always deserved. He hoped she would be okay. He would send money when he could. He signed it with his name, not your husband, not your Chinedu, just his name, as though already practicing the distance. When Amara came out of the bathroom and found the letter, she read it once. Then she folded it neatly and placed it on the table. And then she sat down on the floor, on the cracked tile near the door, and she pressed her face into her hands and wept in a way that had no sound. Outside, the city went on. The puff-puff woman was already frying. Somewhere down the road, a child was laughing. And inside that small shop with the yellow walls, a pregnant woman was alone for the first time in her life. Life with Ella was everything Chinedu had imagined and nothing he had expected. In the first weeks, it was dazzling: the apartment, the restaurants, the events, the feeling of walking into a room and having people look at him the way people look at a man who belongs. Ella dressed him well. She introduced him to her circle with a casual pride that made him feel important. She spoke about his engineering degree at dinner parties and people nodded and were impressed. He slept in a bed with 6 pillows. He drove one of her cars. He wore watches he would have been afraid to touch 6 months ago. He told himself this was who he had always been meant to be. He told himself Amara was better off without a man who had been so trapped by shame. But slowly, quietly, the texture of things began to shift. Ella was generous with her money, but not with herself. There were rooms in her personality that she never opened, evenings where she grew suddenly cold for no reason he could name, looks she gave him sometimes that felt like she was evaluating something. She had a way of reminding him, with the smallest gesture or the most casual phrase, that everything he had was because of her. When they argued, and they did argue, small sharp arguments that came out of nowhere, she had a habit of saying things like, "Remember where I found you," or "Don't forget who gave you all this." Each time she said it, Chinedu would go quiet and swallow whatever he had been about to say, because she was right. He could not afford to fight her. He had nowhere else to go. It was Ella's cousin, a plain-spoken woman named Ngozi, who finally told him the truth. Ngozi had never liked Chinedu. She made this clear through her silences and the way she looked at him whenever they were in the same room. One afternoon, when Ella was not home, Ngozi found Chinedu in the kitchen and said, without any preamble, "You know she's still in love with Emeka." Chinedu turned to look at her. "What are you talking about?" Ngozi poured herself a glass of water with the calm of someone who has decided that the truth is not her problem to manage. "Emeka. Our boyfriend. The one who traveled abroad for his masters. They never broke up, they just paused. He's coming back. He's been coming back." She knew for months. She set the glass down and looked at Chinedu steadily. "I don't know why she brought you here. I don't know what she was trying to prove. But you should know, she never intended to keep you." Chinedu did not sleep that night. He lay in the expensive bed with the 6 pillows and stared at the ceiling and tried to make the pieces fit. And the more he arranged them, the clearer the picture became and the more it hurt. Ella had always been in control. She had always known exactly what she was doing. This apartment, this job, this life she had given him, it was not love. It was a performance. Something she was staging for reasons that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with a grudge she had carried since university, when a young focused student named Chinedu Okafor had looked at her interest and politely turned it away. She had not forgotten. She had waited. And when she found him at that market, struggling, ashamed, hungry for exactly the kind of life she could offer, she had seen her opportunity. Not for love. For revenge. If you're still watching, tell me in the comments, do you think Amara should ever forgive Chinedu for abandoning her while she was pregnant? And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful emotional dramas like this one. Now, let's continue. On the night her son was born, Amara was alone. There was no husband's hand to hold. No voice in her ear telling her she was strong. There was only a kind nurse who held her shoulder and said, "Push, mama, push, your baby is waiting to meet you." And when the cry came, that first sharp, furious, beautiful cry, Amara burst into tears that had nothing to do with the pain of labor and everything to do with the feeling that crashed through her, that this child, this small screaming person, was hers. Completely and entirely hers. She named him Daniel, because Daniel in the stories she remembered from childhood was someone who survived the fire, someone who came out of the lion's den not just alive but unbroken. She looked at her son's face, his round cheeks, his curled fist, his closed eyes still adjusting to the light of the world, and she made him the same promise Chinedu had once made her. "I will never leave you. Whatever comes, I will be here." The months after Daniel's birth were the hardest of Amara's life. She had almost no money. Chinedu had never sent any, just as she had known he would not. Her mother helped when she could, but her mother was old and had her own struggles. There were days when Amara ate once so that Daniel could have more. There were nights when she sat on the floor of the shop after closing time and did the accounts and found numbers that made her stomach drop. There were mornings when she opened the shop with her eyes still swollen from crying the night before, but she opened it. She always opened it. She would strap Daniel to her back the way her grandmother had taught her, the way women in her family had been carrying their children for generations, and she would stand behind that counter with a smile that cost her something real every single day. Customers noticed her. They noticed her warmth, her honesty, her memory for their preferences, her willingness to stay late or open early. They began coming back. They began sending others. A woman named Mrs. Addis, who owned a block of flats nearby and who had been shopping in Amora's store for years, called Amara aside one morning and asked her to sit down. "I have been watching you," Mrs. Addis said. "I see how you work. I see what you are building. I want to help." She offered Amara a loan, not from a bank, not with forms and collateral, but from one woman to another, quietly and with dignity. "Pay me back when you can," Mrs. Addis said. "And don't you dare let this town swallow you." Amara did not cry in the shop. She waited until she was home, until Daniel was asleep, and then she pressed her face into her pillow and cried until she felt light. Then she made a plan. She wrote it down in the same kind of notebook Chinedu had once used for his business plans, page after page, small and careful and serious. She was going to build something. Not to prove anything to anyone. Not to show Chinedu what he had lost. Just because her son deserved a world with more yellow in it. The growth was not dramatic. It was not a movie moment where everything changes overnight. It was slow and disciplined and sometimes exhausting. She moved from the small corner shop to a slightly larger space. She hired one person, then two, then five. She sourced her goods carefully and priced them honestly and tried to zat every customer like the reason she showed up. Word spread. A small local article was written about her after she donated food packages to a community program, young mother and businesswoman back to Thornfield. People read it. People came to see this woman they had read about. And they stayed with 9% ed because what they found was real. Daniel grew alongside the business, watching his mother, learning her values without being taught them directly, absorbing her work ethic the way children absorb everything from the people who raised them, quietly, completely. By the time Daniel was 4, Amara's shop had become a small soups AKWK market. By the time he was 5, it had become something that even she had to look at sometimes and blink, just to believe it was real. Ella ended it on a Tuesday afternoon. She did not sit him down. She did not prepare him. She simply came home from the airport with a man at her side, tall, relaxed, carrying the easy confidence of someone who knows exactly where he belongs, and she looked at Chinedu standing in the living room and said, with a calmness that was more brutal than shouting, "Chinedu, this is Emeka. He's home now. I need you to pack your things and be gone by evening." Chinedu stood completely still. He looked at Emeka, who met his eyes briefly and then looked away, not from guilt but from simple disinterest. He looked at Ella, at the face he had trusted, the face that had promised him a life, and he said, "Ella, what is this?" And Ella, with the same smile she had worn the first day she offered him coffee, said, "This is the end of a very useful arrangement. Thank you for your time, Chinedu. I do wish you well. He packed in silence. He did not argue because there was nothing to argue about. She was right, and he had known somewhere beneath the comfort and the wine and the 6 pillows that this day existed, had always existed, waiting for him at the end of a road he had chosen with his eyes half open. He put his clothes in a bag. He left the watches, they were hers. He left the shoes she had bought him. He took only what he had arrived with, which was almost nothing. As he passed through the living room for the last time, Emeka was already sitting on the couch, his shoes off, completely at home. Ella was in the kitchen. Neither of them came to see him out. He stood at the door for one moment, looking back at the life he had traded everything for, and then he stepped outside, and the door closed behind him. The job at Ella's father's company ended 3 days later. He received a polite email from the HR department. His services were no longer required. He moved into a rented room in a neighborhood he would once have looked down on, and he sat on the edge of a narrow bed and tried to think of what to do next. He applied for other jobs, engineering positions, consultancy roles, but time had passed and the market had moved and he had spent the last years inside Ella's world instead of building his own credentials. He called old university friends, but the calls were awkward and short. He had gone quiet during the years of his comfort, and now the silence he had created was answering him back. He began to understand, sitting in that narrow room, what it truly meant to have nothing, not the romantic poverty of a young couple sharing dreams in a shop with yellow walls, but the empty, isolated poverty of a man who has burned every bridge and stands alone on the shore. He thought about Amara. He had tried not to think about her for years, and he had managed it by staying very busy and never being too quiet. But now there was nothing but quiet. And in the quiet, she was everywhere. The way she pressed his shirt. The way she counted money. The way she spoke to the child in her belly. He thought about the letter he had left on the kitchen table, and the memory of it made him feel sick in a way that no amount of sleep could fix. He thought about the child he had never seen, the child who had been growing all this time somewhere in the world. A boy or a girl, he did not even know. He did not even know. He pressed his palms flat on his knees and sat with that truth until it finished with him. Then he made a decision. He was going to find Amara. Not to ask for the life back, he knew he did not deserve that. But because a man who has done what he did should at least have to look at it. He should at least have to face it with his own eyes open. It took him longer than he expected to find her. Thornfield had changed. He returned to the street where the shop had been, and there was a different business there now, a pharmacy, cheerful and new. He asked around. People remembered Amara but spoke about her the way people speak of someone who has grown beyond the place you are looking for them. She moved, an elderly man told him. Expanded. She's got a proper supermarket now, on the new road. You'll know it when you see it. He walked to the new road, and he saw it. Amara's supermarket. Clean and large, with a parking lot and a painted sign and people going in and out with shopping bags. He stood on the pavement across the road and looked at it for a long time. He did not go in. He did not know why he couldn't bring himself to go in. He stood there until the sun began to lean west, and then he asked someone nearby where Amara herself lived, and after some hesitation, they gave him a general direction. The house was not a mansion in the way that words suggest, towers and gates and guards with earpieces. But it was large and beautiful and well kept, with a garden in front and a boundary wall painted white, and when Chinedu stood before the gate, he felt something happen in his chest, a tightening, a dropping, a feeling like the ground was very far below his feet. He knocked on the gate. He knocked twice, then stood back, and he waited. He heard footsteps, small footsteps, quick and light, and then the gate opened a crack, and a face appeared. A small face. A boy's face. Round cheeks, careful eyes, the particular gravity that belongs to children who have been raised by a woman who takes life seriously. The boy looked up at Chinedu with an expression of calm curiosity and said, "Good afternoon, sir. Who are you looking for?" Chinedu could not speak. Not at first. He looked at the boy's face, this face that was somehow both a stranger and a mirror, and he saw himself in there, unmistakably, in the shape of the nose and the depth of the eyes, and he felt something tear open inside him that he did not have a name for. This was his son. This was Daniel. A real person, not a letter on a page, not a consequence he had left behind, but a real, living, serious-eyed 5-year-old boy who had opened the gate and said, "Good afternoon, sir," with a courtesy that his mother had taught him, because his father had not been there to teach him anything. Chinedu's mouth moved. He heard himself say, in a voice that did not sound like his own, I am looking for your mother. Is she home?" The boy studied him for a moment with those careful eyes. Then he said, "Wait here," and disappeared back inside, and the gate clicked shut, and Chinedu stood alone outside it and pressed a hand over his mouth and tried very hard not to fall apart in the street. Amara came to the gate herself. When she opened it and saw him standing there, older, thinner, without the easy confidence he used to carry, wearing clothes that were clean but not much more, she went very still. She did not look afraid. She did not look angry, not in the sharp way he had braced for. She looked at him with an expression that was the most devastating thing he had ever seen on a human face. She looked unsurprised. As though, somewhere in the back of a very organized mind, she had always known this day would come and had already made her peace with it long before he arrived. Daniel stood just behind her, one hand lightly holding the hem of her dress, watching. Chinedu looked at Amara, and then he looked at the boy, and then something in him that had been held rigid for 5 years simply gave way. He went down on his knees. Right there at the gate, on the concrete, in front of his son and the woman he had destroyed. "Amara," he said, and his voice was nothing. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. Please." Amara did not move for a long moment. She stood at the gate and looked down at the man on his knees, this man she had loved, this man she had polished shoes for, this man who had left her a folded letter and walked out of a life that she had gone on to build without him, and she breathed slowly and steadily, the way a person breathes when they have learned that emotions, no matter how large, do not have to own you. Daniel pressed a little closer to her side. She placed one hand gently on the top of his head without looking at him. Then she said to Chinedu, in a voice that was quiet and complete, "Get up, Chinedu. Get up off the ground." He stood. His knees were shaking. His eyes were wet. He opened his mouth to say more, but she held up one hand, not harshly, just firmly, the way a woman holds up her hand when she has already decided what she is going to say and does not need him to speak first. "Come inside," she said. "We will talk." They sat in her living room, clean, warm, furnished not with the show of someone trying to prove a point but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows what she has and how she earned it. Daniel sat across from his father and studied him with those serious eyes. Chinedu looked at his son and said, carefully, "Daniel, do you know who I am?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mama said you used to live with her. Before I came." It was not an accusation. It was 5 years old and simply factual. And somehow that was worse than anything accusing could have been. Chinedu spoke for a long time. He did not make excuses, or he tried not to, and when he caught himself reaching for one, he stopped and corrected it. He told her about Ella, and what Ella had done, and how he had lost the job and the apartment and found himself sitting in a narrow room finally understanding the fullness of what he had thrown away. He told her he was not there to ask for anything, only to say what needed to be said to her face. He told her he knew there was no repairing what he had broken. He told her that the sight of Daniel at the gate had done something to him that he did not have words for. When he finished, the room was quiet. Amara sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and she looked at him for a long time before she spoke. "I forgive you, Chinedu," she said. And she meant it genuinely, cleanly, without a performance of generosity. "I forgive you because I cannot carry that and everything else I am carrying. But forgiveness does not mean I take you back. What we had is gone. I am not the woman you left, and this is not the life you walked away from. I built this without you, and I will not hand it to you now." Chinedu nodded slowly. He looked at Daniel one more time, at his son, this boy he did not know, this child who had grown up steady and kind and secure in the love of one remarkable woman, and he said, would you allow me to be in his life? Even a little. Even from the outside. Amara considered this for a moment. Then she said, "That is Daniel's choice to make as he grows. Not mine. And not yours. You will have to earn it, slowly, with time, with consistency. Not with money. With presence. with the thing you did not give us when it mattered. Chinedu had no argument. He thanked her. He stood to leave. At the door, he paused and turned back, and he looked at the room, the clean walls, the careful furniture, the woman sitting upright, the boy watching quietly, and he said, almost to himself, "You did this." Amara looked at him. "Yes," she said simply. "I did." He walked out of the gate. It closed behind him. And Amara sat in the silence of everything she had built and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the story was finally, fully hers. Some people will leave you when your hands are empty and return when you are full. Let them come back if they come humbly, but never let them take credit for a harvest that grew only because you stayed, and planted, and refused to stop growing. Chinedu forgot the most important thing a person can know: the ones who love you in your hunger are worth more than anything that comfort can buy. He traded a woman who believed in him for a woman who was using him, and lost both. Amara lost a husband but found herself. And sometimes, as painful as that road is, that is the greater victory. Never abandon the people who stood beside you during your hardest days. Because they may become the people you can never get back. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Remember, never abandon the people who stand by you during your hardest days, because one day you may discover that they were the greatest blessing in your life. See you in the next story.